Welcome to Bat Therapy, the psychology of Batman, superheroes, and other comic book characters. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness. We are your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown, and comic enthusiast and nerd aficionado Keaton Hopkins. This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources. All right, so today we are going rogue, so to speak. Sorry, you guys will understand why that's funny in a second. So, this was actually a joke created by my husband, the techie behind the scenes, to be fair. But we are talking about Days of Future Past, which has a rogue edition, which is what we watched. Hence my little silly joke.
I am torn between which is my favorite X-Men movie, either this one or X-Men 2, The Last Stand. Both of those just stick out, but honestly, I might have to give it to Days of Future Past just for bringing together the two different versions of Magneto and Professor X.
So cool.
I also really appreciate this movie because it undoes what I absolutely loathe, which is X-Men The Last Stand.
Yep. This movie is brilliant because they said, we effed up. We are sorry for X-Men 3. Look, we fixed it. And by golly, they did.
Yes. Oh my God. I can rant. I could go on a very long rant about what was wrong with X-Men 3 and how much I just could not stand it.
Was this the movie that we were both at the midnight showing complaining to our separate groups of, because we weren't there together, complaining to our separate groups of friends at opposite ends of the theater after the movie and then heard each other and we're like, yes, it was terrible.
Yes, that was. Oh my gosh, I completely forgot about that. So yes, X-Men The Last Stand, when we went to the midnight show for it, and I can't even remember which part it was. I don't know if it was the British Juggernaut, like
I forgot about that.
I don't know if it was that or when Mystique just loses her powers or when Angel is only in the movie to catch one person and then you just never see him again, or Rogue getting cured. Like everything was just wrong with that movie. Professor X dying, Cyclops dying.
Yeah, I actually remember there were, I forget who. Maybe it was Cyclops or I don't remember who it was, but they died. My friend next to me goes like, oh my God. And I turned to them, I said, they're not really dead. Yes, they were, because the movie just...
Because it was just tanked. It was just like, no, let's run this baby into the ground. But yeah, so when Days of Future Past came around, I was so glad because I loved X-Men First Class. I absolutely loved that one. And so Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy, Magneto and Professor X are just so bro-tastic.
They're fantastic.
And I absolutely loved it. And so seeing them in it as well as Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, who are really good friends in real life, like that, it was just the best. And of course, Wolverine's in there to just bring them all together.
Of course. Yeah, I love this movie. It's so great. Yeah. So yeah, with Days of Future Past, if there's anyone who needs a little bit of refresher, hopefully you're going and rewatching it because it is phenomenal. But yeah, so essentially we're in this future where what are they called? Seminoles or Sentinels? Sentinels. Yeah. I don't know what I'm talking about over here. So these Sentinels are created that can essentially take on the powers of the mutants and are obliterating them across the world. And even I think they said that they got to the point where they could predict who genetically would become or breed, so to speak,
Oh yeah.
future mutants, and were killing them off as well. And so all of this came to a head in the past. Um, and so they essentially wanted to go back and fix it, which is always a very, this is going to come back again and again because we're talking about alternate realities this season. Time travel is an interesting and weird sort of thing. So does the future they're in disappear? In this one, it disappears if they
Yeah.
fix it, versus what probably is more likely to happen is you just create an alternate line and you still live with whatever happens, and because your past didn't change. But in this
Yeah.
one, they essentially could fix it all.
Well,
So they wanted to go back and essentially undo what created these Sentinels.
what's funny with this too is they are constantly in this one changing their reality. Like apparently they've only
It's
been
ridiculous.
surviving by, oh yeah, the Sentinels, they come, they kill us, but then one of us gets sent back in time to warn the others, so we leave before it ever happens. And I'm like, this is how you live? Like this is this this is
And then
horrible. Like
and then
I
you
would
think, I know, and then you think about the Loki series.
right. It's like it's all
They're
done. It's all
probably
meaningless
pulling their
anyway.
hair out with all of this going
Like,
on.
oh my god. Like, yeah, the oh my god.
The
Like
variant,
all
whatever.
the
Yeah.
different variants.
Oh my
Yeah.
god.
But like so it's it's interesting because this movie is they don't even really explain what happened in in between X-Men 3
Mm-mm.
and this movie, that Professor X is just back. They don't
Oh yeah.
even they don't even bother
You
explaining it.
know, they probably assumed that a lot of people were like me and never watched X-Men 3 again after the first time and forgot it all.
Oh my gosh, I remember I was so excited about that movie. I remember buying Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer because on the DVD there was a sneak peek of X-Men 3, and the
Oh.
only sneak peek that it was just a drawing of when the Golden Gate Bridge moved. That was it. That was the sneak. That was the
Oh, they
sneak
got you
peek.
good.
And
They got you
I
good.
paid $25 for X-Men Rise of the Silver Surfer on DVD.
Yeah, I just have a bad habit of going to the midnight showings of the third movie of things, and then they're terrible. Like Spider-Man, I did it with Spider-Man too. Iron Man.
It worked out for Lord of the Rings.
That's true. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
there you
Works out every now and then. Okay, so Days of Future Past. We love this movie. It's
yeah,
fantastic. Yeah, you've gotta, any of you that really are interested in time travel and how it would actually work, you got to set that brain aside. I'm from a family, I understand how hard that is. I'm from a family that we watched Pandora, or excuse me, watched Avatar, and we're talking about Pandora, and literally afterward, my family's like, well, how much oxygen was truly in the air if such and such was bad for humans, but things caught fire? So I understand if it's hard for you.
did y'all really
Genetic.
do that? Did
Oh,
that
yeah,
really happen?
that really
God.
happened. So I understand if you're someone who struggles to set the science aside. But if you do, you know, you can really appreciate the movie. But yeah, they change so many things. And they claim it changes the future, but it doesn't fully change the future until the past fixes itself entirely. I don't know. There are things you have to let go of. But
Yeah,
if you're able to do that, great movie.
yeah.
Um
And
and yeah, just a lot of interesting stuff.
just so you know, there were two different versions of X-Men Days of Future Past. So there was the theatrical cut, and then later on they released the Rogue cut. It's about 20 minutes longer, I think. And but in the original cut of the movie, Rogue was not in it. In this version, she is alive in this alternate dark reality, and she's being kept in the X mansion and being experimented on. But yeah, so there's two different versions of Days of Future Past. I prefer the Rogue cut over the theatrical version. I really enjoyed it.
And I do what Keaton tells me. So that's
Yeah,
what I watched.
I suggested it. I suggested it. But so first things first, this alternate reality is really bleak. It's
Yeah.
really bleak, and they are at this. They're all the characters are kind of at this point where they're just like, we can't keep doing this. Something's got to give, right?
Yeah, essentially, there's this really interesting discussion, essentially between the original X-Men group, like Storm and um, Patrick Stewart's version of
Yeah,
Professor X and that sort of thing. So kind of the
Wolverine.
original
Yeah,
movie people, with the younger generation, and a lot of them are introduced in this, which is cool. Like you see Blink, and she is mind blowing. What
yeah.
she just
Blink
like
and
bounces
Bish.
them everywhere. It's amazing.
Yeah, they brought in Bishop and
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
Warpath.
so
Yeah,
cool.
all those. Yeah, it's
Warpath,
cool.
all that was awesome.
Yeah,
But essentially, the older generation trying to convince the younger generation, you can't keep doing this. You guys are just one step ahead. Something's going to fall apart. Essentially, we've got to sacrifice ourselves in a big risk, but to make a larger change that can be sustainable.
yeah.
Which is, yeah, very, very interesting. But yeah, it's just a super bleak picture for sure.
And so one of the things that caught me there was just how the younger generation was like, yeah, I guess we'll make that sacrifice play for the good of all because in this, whenever this happens, whatever they're about to change could prevent them from even being
Yeah,
born.
from
Like it,
existing.
yeah, from completely from existence. And so I thought that was really interesting that they did that. And throughout,
Hmm.
Magneto is talking with Professor X and throughout this movie about like how bad it is that they spent so long fighting against each other instead
Mm,
of focusing
yeah.
on what was actually and ended up being a lot more important.
That that's a really great thing that you're talking about too, and there's this, like, juxtaposition too, because you have, yeah, the older generation of Professor X and Magneto, and there's this whole horrible thing, and you never see Magneto turn on Professor X, which is what always happens.
Yeah,
But then you see them Wolverine, he goes to the past, he's getting everybody together. They break Magneto out of a facility because people think he assassinated the president, who, was actually a mutant he was trying to save, if that makes anyone feel better. But they come together and they work together in the past, but you see that Magneto just can't help himself.
he can't
Despite
help himself.
despite him despite the information he has, it's just not enough not having lived through all of these different pieces. Hearing
What
it's just not the same.
he has so much anger.
Yep.
He has so much anger, and with completely good reason. And the thing is, he makes all of his decisions, which all of us do. We make a lot of our decisions based off of what previously happened to us.
True.
And in his mind, he's seeing history repeat itself
Mhm.
as far as what happened to him in the Holocaust, and now he's seeing it happen again with the mutants. Like
And then he gets
most,
proof from the future about
yeah,
how dire it gets.
yeah, he gets proof from the future. And on top of that, all of the different mutants we were introduced to in X-Men First Class, almost all of them you find out they were experimented on and
Yep.
murdered.
Oh, it
And
was
so
terrible.
he is, I don't want to say he's right, but I understand. Right?
People can do terrible things that we don't agree with, and we don't necessarily consider them wrong per
Right.
se. And actually, you actually hit on something I didn't think about with this movie, but it's really interesting. So decision making. You were
Yeah.
talking about where decision making comes from, and so there's this whole line of psychology research. There's also a lot of people in like economics as well. There's some crossover there that focus on decision making. And so there were all these theories they created about the logic of decision making and what leads people to make the decisions they make. And they couldn't predict how people would make decisions until they brought the emotional component into it. Because essentially, you can give people all the facts, but
Hmm.
you can't just remove the feeling from a lot of these like real life scenarios. And so, yeah, you have things like Magneto where you're like, oh my God, why are you messing with this? We almost had it all fixed. And now you kind
Yeah.
of blew it up into this bigger thing. You're so right when it comes to those decisions. It's not just about the facts in front of you. It's about the different experiences, the emotions that come with it, and also what value you place on different things.
Yeah.
And
A-
his value system, it at times is very different than Xavier's, Professor X's.
And in this movie, you really see it because you find out that because it's set in is it the 60s or 70s? The 70s.
I think 70s.
Yeah, it's set in the 70s because it's post Vietnam.
Yes.
And you find out that Magneto was just out there just kind of fighting the good fight
Mhm.
till the end, and he tried to save Kennedy, who was
It was a
a
mutant.
mutant. I do love that they brought in that conspiracy theory. Like, how else do you explain a bullet that curves? Like, like all of that.
And you're
I'm
like,
like, this
"Oh,
is.
snap."
I'm like, oh, I'm glad that that conspiracy is canon in this universe as well. Um, but he's just been kind of just concentrating and building his power while Professor X is just in a really, really dark place.
Oh, yeah.
Because he can't shut off his mind, and he's turned to drugs to kind of turn his mind off. And I remember the first time I watched this movie, I was like, how dark is this gonna get? Because you
Mm,
see him like grab like a belt and tighten
mhm.
it. Like it didn't. I was glad when Hank was like, "Oh yeah, the those drugs help him walk," because it looked like something else.
No, but I actually really love that they did that because I think in a certain way it helps to humanize a little bit better the things like heroin usage, where you a lot of times we struggle when we see people at a certain point with substance use and struggling with that. We struggle to relate to them or connect to them or be able to
Yes.
understand why they would make that choice. And I thought this was a brilliant way of essentially alluding to that practice, but making it something that I think the everyday person could better empathize with because they they said, "Okay, well, a medicine, this is something that helps him regain a part of himself, the walking that he didn't have before." And yet, it rips away I think it's Magneto that talks about, like, how could you do something that takes away the very thing that makes you so special? So he brings back walking with that everyone can do. Well, not everyone, but most of us can do. But taking away something so poignant, he doesn't have his powers anymore, his ability to do all these different X-Men related things. So he really I mean, and over time, you it, it seems like Hank realized like this isn't just about his legs. He's also trying to cover up his suffering. He's trying to get away from feeling all the hurt of all the death and destruction happening. So I thought it was brilliant that they did all of this in a way that alludes enough where you can't not think about drug use that we see in kind of our standard
Yeah.
life. Like you were saying, whoa, where is this going? And yet they made a few tweaks that gave some empathy that I hope for people can kind of bridge that gap a little bit where usually people struggle to empathize.
Yeah. And it's a weird miracle drug kind of thing because it's like it's a drug that helps him walk, but it also turns off his powers. I'm like, how are
Mhm.
those things connected? But whatever. But it was interesting because he was taking it kind of to shut his mind off and to be able to walk again. But Hank McCoy, he was simply taking it to hide how he would
Mhm.
normally look. I thought that was really interesting that he was almost taking it as almost like a makeup that he was trying
Yeah.
to hide.
Which hit on the previous movie. So when it comes to Hank and being Beast, he really struggled with that. He really struggled because it's like a lot of things in life. There are certain things that are different about ourselves that we can choose when we share it with other people. And then there are certain things that are going to be obvious whether you want them to be or not.
Yeah. And on the other side of that coin, there is Mystique,
Yes.
who has grown. Like I love what they did with her
Mm-hmm.
in X-Men First Class and this one,
Yes.
because in X-Men First Class she was more in Hank's corner, like in that corner where she didn't like who she was, and then that's when Magneto came in and
Mm-hmm.
was like, no, mutant, and the
I
whole
dig
theme of it
blue.
was, yeah, the whole thing was mutant and proud, and I
Yep.
love that that was like this running
Mm-hmm.
motif that just kept coming back, and that's where she is now. She's just kind of out there fighting the good fight and just trying to help the mutants that are out there any way she can. Like she
Mm-hmm.
rescues some of them from Vietnam, but at the time it doesn't seem like she is okay with killing the way that Magneto is,
Right.
but she's getting there
Yeah.
because
She's
it's
building up. She's seeing all the atrocities.
her limits are being pushed.
Her limits are being pushed, even within her own people, so to speak. So even within mutants, a lot of them don't accept her as she is. Why can't you blend in and be like everybody else, kind of thing? Yeah, her limits are definitely getting pushed, and actually, she is the catalyst essentially for these sentinels because in and this is we've hit on self-fulfilling prophecies before. And so they actually hit on with this that so she was so terrified of the very real threat of Trask, so someone kind of within like military industry weaponing and whatnot, of him wanting to build the sentinels to essentially create genocide against mutants. She was so terrified of this, she actually that's what tips her over the edge in the kind of original timeline that they're trying to change. She
Yeah.
assassinates him, and unfortunately, that actually causes a ripple effect where the people who weren't concerned about mutants, all of a sudden they become very concerned.
Yes.
And because they learn about her ability to change her identity, they actually get DNA and other things from her that make the Sentinels truly powerful. So it's kind of this in the desperate attempt to stop something, it actually theoretically anyway ends up in this worse reality in the future.
Yes. Uh Gosh, I love this. I just love this movie. But Logan comes in, and Wolverine serves as the character that I'm not used to him playing. I'm not used to him being the one that's like, gotta fight. You gotta be hopeful. You gotta
Mhm.
like he's normally just like claws and stabby things. Like that's his thing, but he's so good at it. I love you, Jackman. But
Oh,
like
he's great.
this one was very different because he's the only one that they could send back. And it's such a funny scene the way that they say it. It's like, because it's like, oh, no one's mind could handle that. They could it would just drive them crazy. And it's this weird, awkward line. It's like, but what if there was a mind that could snap back? And it's like yours, healing guy. Like, is that
We
what you're
see what you're
talking
getting
about?
at.
Yeah, because
It is a funny place for him to be, and he actually there are multiple points that they touch on it that I really love. Like when he goes back and Professor X points out that he essentially told them to F off when they were reaching out
yeah,
to him in the previous movie, which was hilarious.
he
And then
remembers it. Yeah,
he remembers it. And then there's a point where Wolverine's like, "You're not the person I'm not the person you need right now. I'm just the only one who could do it." And
yeah.
yeah, he is put in an awkward position, that's hard for him to maneuver, which is definitely interesting.
But you know what I did like about it? It's because sometimes you have to be that person, even though
Yeah.
that's not who you normally
Mhm.
are. Like, I mean, I know I've like it happens a lot as a teacher.
Oh, I bet.
There'll be days where I'm just certainly not focused, or there's some personal matter going on and I'm down and out. But at the time it's like, no, you have to be here
Mhm.
for these students. You have to let them know that there's something better out there, that they can do it, that despite what they feel right now, it can be better, and you know this because you've gone through it. And so I liked seeing Wolverine be that person, but at the same time, he 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 he's not a coddler, right? Like he's not gonna. It's definitely a tough love kind of guy.
Yeah, like when he meets Magneto in the past, he says something like, "Oh, so you've always been this way. You've always been an ass.
Yeah,
Good to
it's like,
know."
I spent a long time fighting you, man. Like you're a survivor, just like me. Yeah, but
It it must
yeah,
be so interesting though, because I mean, I'm sure this happens with being a teacher too, but as a therapist, I mean, we actually we spend time in the beginning learning details about a person's life and their history and all this information that can seem random, and then as time goes on, you delve into more and more of that background, and it's so helpful in being able to understand a person and what's important to them and what might be helpful for them and just make sense of things. So, can
yeah.
only imagine what it'd be to be able to actually like go and witness for yourself, cuz you'd be able to see so many things that a person either can't convey, or their perception might be different than what you can observe at the time. Or yeah, that would be, oh man, that would just be, as a therapist, that'd be such a treat to just be able to go back and be like, let me see what actually happened here. That'd be so cool.
Another thing that's really cool too is Professor X is in a really unique position because when it comes to mutants and they all have powers, his powers are just like god level, like can
Mm,
stop minds, can read minds, can get into minds, like can essentially take over people. And seeing him in a position where he even says it at one point. He says he feels he's broken
mm,
and he feels helpless. It's hard to imagine
yeah.
someone with that much power saying that they feel broken or they feel helpless. And it honestly it makes me think about how many people like like celebrities or people in power that have horrible, brutal, like mental health issues,
Mm,
and we don't see it because we're
yep.
like, but it's you. Like,
Mhm.
but it's you. Like, come on, you do. You're a rock star. You're a movie star. You're
Mhm. There's a
such a yeah,
misconception.
yeah,
There's because you're saying, "Oh, because he has this, it means he has all this other stuff too." That's not
yes,
how life usually doesn't work that way. There are very few people where you could say, "Oh, they have literally everything."
yeah,
There, there, and two, yeah, I mean, he has a lot of power, but I mean, I guess, if he had more of the mindset of Magneto, potentially he'd be putting a lot of time and energy into maybe forcing things, trying to force it to be what he wants it to be.
yeah,
But at the end of the day, I think some of his hedonism that he's struggling through, and the depression that definitely seems to be there as well. I think a big part of that is him realizing that you can have this much power and still not have the power to stop some
yes,
very big things.
yes. And oh man, there's so many different. Like, I feel like everyone gets time to shine in this movie because Wolverine is basically he's in between both realities, but on top of that, he's been living way longer
Mm, mhm,
than any of them because I mean we saw what he was dealing with in X-Men Origins Wolverine coming all the way through to X-Men 1 2 3 into Days of Future Past, and so he's been alive for centuries.
yeah, yeah,
And kudos to him for still believing in humanity,
I know.
right? Like after honestly being let down. Like I think about the montage from the beginning of X-Men Origins where it's like, oh yeah, he fought in like the Civil War and World War One and World War Two and Vietnam. Like he's just seen nothing but the worst sides of humanity throughout, but yet he's still here and he's like, gotta fight for it. Just
Yeah.
gotta fight for it and hope things work themselves out. And in his mind, sometimes I'm wondering if he's saying until they don't again, because that's how this works.
You know, I think there is some of that going on, and when it comes to life and reality, it's really hard to find that acceptance and the willingness to experience the pain and the reality of things. Because like I was mentioning earlier, okay, so with Xavier, you see him really struggling to even take care of himself. Hank, the beast, is taking care of him for years. And he's really struggling because he just sees what he's not able to do. And then there's, say, Magneto, who says, I see what's happening, and he's trying to force certain changes, as is Mystique. And at least in this, they're suggesting that certain things, if you force them, they might end up getting worse rather than better,
Yeah,
or not changing, potentially worsening. And yeah, it is tricky, but how do you find the way to say, okay, at least at this point, we don't seem to be able to find a way to prevent all of this destruction. How do I find a way to just keep putting one foot in front of the other and take life where I can get it? Which is
yeah,
kind of Wolverine. So he's a little bit of a wanderer at times,
yeah.
but
He is.
eventually he really sees the importance of all the connections with people. And so it's really cool that he's actually the one that can be the catalyst to help bring back these connections and people he had lost.
Yeah, and I tell you, and he does finally connect with Xavier, and it's by far my favorite scene in the whole movie. It's when Charles Xavier, when he does decide, I'm gonna get off the medication and I'm gonna let the powers come back and I'm gonna get back in Cerebro, and it all goes to hell really quick. Like
Mm,
the fuses blow and his mind, he can't control it. And it, like, it's a scene that, like, it just really got me, because he's talking to Wolverine, and Wolverine's like, "You're just rusty. You can do it." And he explains his power. He said, "You don't understand. It's not just that I'm rusty." He said, "I can flip the switch." His specific line is, "I can flip the switches and I can turn the knobs." He said, "But my power doesn't come from
mhm.
here. It comes from," and he points to his heart,
Yeah,
and he says, "And it's broken." And oh my God, that when
yeah,
he explained it that way, I was like, man, like I really just
yeah.
I felt that.
Mhm.
And at that point, that's when Wolverine's like, read my mind. And he actually listens to old Xavier talking to him, and he's just trying to get through to him, and he's just, we you need to believe again. Like,
Mm,
I know you're afraid. We need you to hope again. And I absolutely love
yeah.
that scene, because he went by then, of course, Hank comes back after he reads Wolverine's mind, and Hank goes, "The power's back on." And Charles like, "Yes it is." I was like, oh, I
And
loved it. I
and
loved it. I was
Keaton
so
Keaton
happy.
wipes away a single tear.
I did. Honestly, I have cried at that scene before, because I've been in my low points, and it's funny
Yeah, it's
because,
a
like,
good
you'll
scene.
get in low points like that, and you'll watch those scenes while you're in it, and you're like,
Yep.
"Yes,
Mhm.
that's how I feel right now." Because
Yep.
I'm not gonna lie, there've been so many times I have felt broken. Like, I've felt
Yeah.
like I just have no control over my life, and there's nothing that I can do, and I'm like, "Man, I wish that me now could go back to
Mm.
angsty high school Keaton, or even mid 20s Keaton, or even
Mhm.
Keaton 6 months ago, and be like, it's
Yep.
gonna be okay, dude. Like, you can do this. You, it's gonna be all right." And I think that's what I feel like that's what everybody wishes they could do. One, everyone does wish they could go back and change something in the
Mm,
past like this movie is doing, right? But
yep.
also I would love to like message my younger self because like there was gosh, there was one when we were in do you remember when we were in high school, senior year, we had to write a letter to ourselves that we would get like 5 years
Yeah. Yeah,
down
yeah.
the road? Oh my gosh. I remember getting that and I couldn't have got it at a worse time.
Oh, no.
Oh my gosh, it was horrible because I was like, I hope you're doing this now and I hope you do it was none of those things.
Oh, I know what time. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was none of those things.
Mhm. Or because,
I yeah,
and here's the thing, folks. So sometimes you set up plans for yourself and they completely change. And it
yeah,
doesn't have to do with you as a person or your abilities. It's just sometimes things aren't a fit and you've got to switch and shift. And yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I could see how that would be tough. Cause yeah, I mean, that's the tricky thing with some of this is sometimes that knowledge can be so helpful, and then sometimes it almost shakes your foundation even further, like you said,
yes.
depending on the timing.
Yeah, the timing was just awful for it, and that was, like, the lowest point that I think I was ever at, but if I could go back now to when I was opening that
Mm,
letter and be like, "Dude, don't worry about it. It gets better. You're more than how you feel right now." Like, I would just love to be able to just lift myself up like that. And it was just such a touching it was just such a touching scene just getting Xavier back because when you look at how similar but how different him and Magneto are, it reminds me of that quote where it's like, would you rather be feared or be loved?
mm,
Because Xavier is like, hey, we can cohabitate with these people.
yeah,
And Magneto is at this position right now where he's like, you better not mess with us. This
yeah,
is what we can do, and you better back off. Right?
yeah.
Uh,
Because
and
he saw
yeah,
it more as if we cohabitate, it gives them the opportunity to get the upper hand. They
yes,
won't truly cohabitate, was it is his belief.
yes. And so it's just, yeah, it was the some of the stuff that they really touch on in this, it's it's just really good because throughout, once we get Xavier back, the biggest thing he's trying to get Mystique to do is not go down
Yeah.
a dark path, which is fun. They completely flipped the script on her character between
Mhm.
X-Men 1 and 2, and then in First Class, it's like, oh yeah, she's Xavier's sister, and they grew up together, and I was like,
They're best buddies.
okay,
Yep, yep.
okay,
Oh,
oh,
and
it's
yeah,
yeah,
their storyline's great too because once again, you almost create the reality you're afraid of. Xavier keeps trying to control her to put her on the best path, but that pushes her further away. And the way to get her to be more true to I don't know if it's more true to herself or those parts of herself he sees that she doesn't see, the kind of caring side and whatnot. He has to step back and allow her the potential to do something different.
yeah. Like I don't want to say he's letting her grow up, but he I think he's growing up and
Yep.
realizing
Yes.
he can't just control people. He has to let
Mhm.
them live their life the same way he's gonna live
Exactly.
his.
Yeah. I do wanna jump back. You were talking about kind of being able to speak to this past self or a future self or whatnot, and
Yeah.
that's actually can be a really powerful thing, and unfortunately, at least at this point, to our knowledge, we do not have the ability to time travel in a way that would produce something like we're talking about here. But there are ways to kind of envision, hey, what would have comforted me back then? And for some people that can be helpful to kind of go through the practice of let me go through the process of comforting my past self. For some people it doesn't help because it just kind of reminds them of what was lacking. But for other people that can actually be a really healing thing. Or sometimes we encourage folks, hey, write down the things that you're going to need. What do you think you might need when you're in a tough spot? Prepare those things for yourself so that when you're in those tough places, you have that stuff that can remind you that not every time is that bad.
Yeah.
reminds you that these things ebb and flow and that you'll come back out of it. You wanna be careful, be really mindful about it. You don't want the bad timing like Keaton's talking about,
Yeah.
um, but absolutely, it can be such a helpful thing. Sometimes we know better than anyone else what we're going to need for support.
Yes.
And sometimes we feel like we're alone if someone else can't give it to us, but you know what? It can be so powerful to help heal yourself.
Yes. Yes, it really can. But I love the way that this movie went because like you said, Magneto is still in this position where he's like, "No, I don't trust humans. Yes, we have to be violent and there is
Mm,
no other way." Charles is on the other side saying there is a better way, and Mystique is directly in the middle where
yep.
she's like, "I'm gonna be violent a little bit, like, but I'm gonna," but she ends up making the right decision, which ends up making the humans make the right decision because
Yep.
Magneto's about to kill them, but then she steps in and saves them. And
Yep.
on top of that, not only does she save them, she is the kind of mutant that normally they would be very afraid of
Mhm.
saving them. Like she is the mutant that, oh, if you see them on the street, you're like, oh gosh, you're afraid of them
Yeah.
versus just
She's one of the ones that
looking,
stands
yeah.
out as very different and has a power that could really be taken advantage of.
Yes. Yes, and so them seeing her save them and then, make a choice because at any time she could have killed them because she was inside the vault with
Yep.
them. Like, she could have done it and chose not to and chose to save them, and that changed their mind and
Mhm.
set their future forward. And it was really interesting. I wish so badly that people could see like that is a message about like not being prejudiced towards
Mm.
people or like just it was just such a good theme and a good it was yeah.
And allowing someone some space, they
Yes.
might surprise you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, gosh, it was, I loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. Do we have a mindful nerd moment?
Mindful nerd moment. So, it didn't take me long to come up with this one because I was like, "What do I do?" And I was like, "Oh, they kinda alluded to mindfulness would be useful during this movie." So, Wolverine, he is going to the past, and how he goes to the past is Kitty essentially sends his consciousness, I can talk, I promise, into the past, but she actually talks about just try and stay kinda even keel, pretty level as you can in terms of your emotions, your physiology, that sort of thing, because if there's too much of a shift, it's too hard for her to keep him there, and he'll
Yeah.
slingshot back, and so there are actually a few times where there's kinda some slingshotting going on.
Yes.
And so I was like, "Oh, these would be perfect times for Wolverine to
Oh
practice
my,
some grounding and
yes.
mindfulness so
Oh
he
my
can stay in
gosh.
the past."
Oh my gosh.
Right?
I didn't even think about that. Yeah, that's, wow, that's like the very definition.
Yeah, I know.
Like peaceful
S
thoughts.
Yes, exactly. So some peaceful thoughts,
Oh my
helping to
goodness.
just kinda
Perfect.
level yourself out. Because here's the ironic, unfortunate thing. What can create tension is when you go, "I need to relax. I need to relax." Oh, you get really tense. Or
Right.
I need to chill out." You get more anxious because you know
Right.
it counts or it matters. So how do we use some mindfulness to kinda get around that a little bit? So one of the big moments that he kinda gets shifted and struggles to stay where he's at is he essentially sees the person that tortures him, and so he has, his, like, bone claws, but they turn into metal claws, and essentially the person that tortures him and puts the metal all over his bones, which, by the way, is an incredibly painful process.
Right.
He sees this person randomly in a room in the past,
Yeah,
and it
William Stryker just out of
I
nowhere.
know.
Like, I was, oh my God, this guy. Like, yeah.
I know, I know.
But that's how
Um,
life really works. It's like the person you don't want to see, and
that's who you
you
see.
don't want to see anywhere. They're like right there at Target when you walk in. It's like,
Yep.
Jesus
You're on a
Christ,
date,
man.
your ex is at the table next to you. Yeah,
Yes.
that kind of thing. So yeah, he essentially starts I can't remember if he's like flashing back to memories but he's definitely part of him recognizes who this is, and so he really struggles to stay in the past.
Yes.
So what I want us to do is pretending that we're in that scene. So he's I think it's like a conference room or whatnot. There are a bunch of people. He looks over, he sees Stryker. And all of a sudden, he's starting to feel all the anxiety and things because it's pulling back some bad memories. And so just practicing some grounding, some mindfulness to try and stay in the past, not get whipped back to the future because he's getting just feeling all these things. Okay. So, as we always do, we will sit comfortably, but try and sit straight. If you're comfortable with it, it can help to close your eyes, just help you focus in on the image. But if not, just not looking at anything in particular in the room, letting your eyes unfocus. And first, just take a few breaths, just to kind of get you in the mood, into the moment. And as you breathe, without trying to change it or anything, just shift to imagining yourself breathing as Wolverine. So you're in this conference room, you're breathing, you're Wolverine, you're looking around, and all of a sudden you see a man that looks familiar. You might not know why, but it's pulling a lot of uncomfortable feelings. You might feel scared, you might feel pain. Your body might be reacting or jolting. It's almost as if you're being pulled to a memory that is kind of hazy, kind of fuzzy, not pleasant. And then you start realizing, uh-oh, I'm having trouble staying in the past. Kitty's having trouble keeping me in the past. I need to stay in the past. This is important. And so what you do is you reach out your hand and you put it on a chair that just happens to be next to you. And you feel that chair. You notice what that chair feels like. You take in a deep breath through your nose. Let it out through your mouth. Making sure all that air comes out. And really just feeling what that chair fabric feels like. The ridges, the edges in it, where it curves or stiffens. You notice where it gives. You notice how plush it might be. You move your hand along that chair just to give you that sensation of touch for something in the room with you right now. And you take another deep breath in through your nose, out through your mouth. And you think to yourself, I am in this conference room. I am touching this chair. I am here with Xavier. I am safe in this moment. And you take one more deep breath in through the nose, out through the mouth, making sure all that air gets out, not leaving any in there. Then you focus back in on what's happening in that room. So now we're going to shift back to the podcast. So take a few breaths. Start your first breath as Wolverine. You've brought that edginess down for yourself a bit. The next few breaths, you start shifting from that conference room and being Wolverine, and you start shifting back to yourself where you're sitting right now, listening to the podcast. And when you're ready, you open your eyes, you refocus, and we see what Keaton thinks.
I like it. I like it because like it's funny because I didn't even I don't know why I didn't even think about it when I was watching the movie, but he was literally practicing
Mm-hmm.
mindfulness in the
Yep.
movie. Like I didn't. I don't even know why I didn't think about that. Like that, it's perfect, absolutely perfect.
I
Like, oh, you
know.
got it. Like you forced mindfulness. It should be a thing. You
But
better
I
be
mean that
mindful. The entire fate of the world depends on it.
well, and that's the thing though, is that mindfulness, yeah, I think people think, okay, you've got to sit and you do your practice and you're all meditation-y and this is not to mock any of that, to be clear. There that works very well for a number of people. But you also, yeah, you need it to blend into daily life. Throw it in where you need it.
Yeah,
And, sometimes it takes the edge off. Sometimes, in this case, he actually slung back to the future for a while and had to come
yeah,
back. And it was a very intense moment for him. It's understandable that happened. But if you can use some of these skills in that moment, you're probably going to bounce back to the past a little faster, so to speak.
yeah. But yeah, I absolutely loved that. If y'all haven't seen this movie,
Do it.
yeah, please check this one out. I really enjoyed it. It makes me miss what could be. I'm hoping the MCU eventually gets around to giving us
Mm,
some X-Men because they're by far my favorite my favorite part of Marvel. If there's yeah, I definitely wish they'd go ahead and bring them back, but yeah, Days of Future Past is amazing and the
and a
power,
lesson. It's a lesson in if you break it, you can fix it.
yeah, power can be back on. Thanks for nerding out with us.
I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown. Find me on social media at Crafting the Mind.
And I'm comic enthusiast and professional nerd Keaton Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JBS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. See you next week, same bat time, same bat channel.